we're going to talk about what the church is. The word church means gathering. The Greek word that's translated in English as church is ecclesia. Ecclesia. Now, the English word church comes from the Germanic word for something that belongs to the Lord. So it's really a misnomer. A better English word to translate the Greek word ecclesia, which is used in the Bible for church, a better word would be assembly or congregation. A congregation is a congregating or a gathering. All right, I'm going to call it gathering again and again. So what is the church? The church is the gathering. Our church in Los Angeles, you'll see the sanctuary later on in a picture. Our church is called Christian Assembly. It's actually a pretty accurate translation of the word, but it sounds completely generic. But it doesn't have a generic meaning. It has a history behind it. The word ecclesia is also the word in Greek that's used to translate the Hebrew word in the Old Testament, kihal, which means gathering. Kihal Israel is the gathering of Israel. There are times, again and again, when God calls Israel to gather together, to do business with God. Maybe beneath Mount Sinai, or maybe in Deuteronomy on the outskirts of the Promised Land before they enter. Israel gathers in the wilderness. There's a picture. I chose that one over some other ones because it's kind of Steven Spielberg-y. This is the gathering of Israel, the encampment of Israel in the wilderness around the tabernacle or the pillar of fire that signifies God's presence. When it's time to do business, they come out of their tents and they meet around God's presence. And this gathering is really a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what God tells Moses. Let my people go worship me in the wilderness. And God's wish is fulfilled, that Israel be gathered around his presence and structured under his Torah, be a sign to the nations of his presence. So it's not just a random gathering like, hey, let's have an assembly. It has true theological significance. And the word has a further history because Israel, having been gathered around God's presence and led to the Promised Land and gathered into the Promised Land, it forgets who it is. The exile of Israel is a horrible theological crisis for Israel. Is God not going to fulfill the promise? Have we irrevocably broken the covenant? Is it over? And the prophets who announce this coming scattering and who interpret it both beforehand and in the event, they prophesy that it's not the last word. This is not the end of Israel. It will be regathered. God will bring it back home. This begins to happen when Cyrus proclaims that Israelites are free to go back to their homeland. Most of them don't. Most of them remain scattered, but some do. That comes at the very end of 2 Chronicles. And it's like a tantalizing taste or glimpse of the beginning of the fulfilling of what the prophets have promised. But it's terribly incomplete, both because Israel remains scattered around all those nations and because Israel remains dominated by all of the empires surrounding it. Dominated by Persians, dominated by Alexandrians, by the Greeks, and later dominated by the Roman Empire. So the regathering of Israel is agonizingly incomplete in the Old Testament. And what you find in the New Testament, again and again, are announcements that in Jesus Christ, in his gathering together of First, 12 representatives and 70 or so followers. Those aren't random numbers. 12 brothers and 70 people in all entered into Egypt at the end of Genesis. This small kernel grows in the book of Acts, not just numerically, but it grows geographically. It first includes Jews who were in town for the festival, who were from all the various places of the known world. And then, especially under the pressure of persecution, the good news travels outside Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and all the way to what the first century world considered the ends of the earth. Even jumping national boundaries, ethnic boundaries, into Samaritan circles and Gentile circles. All right? 1 Peter is addressed to the exiles of the dispersion. It's addressed to Christians, but it narrates the church, it narrates Christians as exiles dispersed and waiting for their full regathering as a kind of down payment in the process of being regathered. This regathering is why I'm going to give you another word for ecclesia in context. You can call it a reunion. It's not just a congregation, it's a re-congregation. When we meet every week, we are reunited in remembrance of that first day of the week when the women went to the tomb and it was empty, and they and the other followers and even newcomers saw the risen Jesus. All right? So this word, even though it's a totally ordinary word, has a rich narrative behind it that gives it its true significance. You should carry that significance with you into church on Sunday mornings. Our local assemblies are part of this grand regathering of all nations in and under Jesus Christ. They're little anticipations, they're little reunions that look forward to the great cosmic reunion of all things in Christ.